Yeah, today's daf is Kuf Mem Dalet. So we're going to start on Kuf Mem Gimel, bottom of the page, Amud Bet. It's Purim, so Chag Sameach to anybody who's listening to this recording. We are up to the issue of V'savar Rabbi Yehuda Sitam Asur. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 lines from the bottom. So we had said that according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you bring fruit in either stam, you bring it without designating it for any particular purpose, or you bring it for juice reasons, so then you can't drink what emerges from it naturally on Shabbat, right? That was with respect to pomegranates and berries, right? So it depends what your intention is. If you intended for them to be juiced, so then the juice that comes out of them might entice you to squeeze them more to extract more juice. If they are, if you intended them for food, so then you don't really care about the juice anyway, so the fact that it's seeped out is not going to encourage you to juice them anymore. So stam, without designating though, also he said, you treat it the same as bringing it in for drink, because he said, l'mashkin v'lastam, okay, if it's stam or purposely for drink, then you treat it like a juicing fruit. So is that really true that stam, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that without a designation we assume that you want the juice? That the Chachamim say that if you have milk of a woman, if she wanted the milk to go out, okay, a nursing woman, so if she wanted the milk to go out, then whether she wanted it to go out or not, it's still machshir. We'll explain what this means in a second. With animal milk, only if you wanted the animal's milk to come out is it machshir. Now what this means is that in order for a food to be mekabel tum'ah, in order for it to be able to receive tum'ah, to be receptive to tum'ah, it has to first become wet. And it has to be wetted by a beverage. One of the beverages that's halachically defined as a beverage. And what is, in addition to the substance having to be a beverage, it has to be a substance that was desired, okay, that the existence of which was desired. So the Chachamim are saying that when it comes to a woman's milk, we don't apply that rule that it had to be milk that she wanted to come out. Even if the milk dripped out and she didn't want it to come out and it fell on food, it could also render food mekabel tum'ah. However, with animal milk, it has to be desired. It has to be that you wanted the milk to come out. Rabbi Akiva says, Amar Rabbi Akiva, Kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer ho. Uma chalav ha'isha she'eno miyuchad ela lektanim mitamei l'ratzon v'shel l'ratzon. Chalav ha'behema she'miyuchad ben lektanim ben legdolim eno din she'itamei ben l'ratzon ben shelo l'ratzon. Rabbi Akiva says, I disagree. I think the rule is the same in both cases. Because a woman's milk is only for children. She nurses children. And yet, whether she wants the milk or not, you're telling me that it's considered a beverage when it drips out. Animal milk is for everybody. So shouldn't it be even broader? Its definition, its parameters should be even broader, and we should say that whether you, certainly, if for a woman's milk, we say it doesn't matter whether you wanted the milk to drip out or not, then certainly for an animal's milk we should say the same. Amrullah, they said to him, Im tameh chalav ha'isha shelo l'ratzon shedam magifat yatameh chalav ha'behema shelo l'ratzon shedam magifat tahor. The rabbi said, no, the analogy is like this. When it comes to a woman, if fluids exit her body, for example, if she gets a cut and her blood drips on something, it can make that thing subject to tum'ah when obviously she didn't want her arm to get cut or whatever, but still her blood is considered a liquid. So since anything that exudes from her body, whether she wanted it or not, is machshir, we say the same about milk. About blood and about milk, same. But animals, if an animal gets wounded and its blood drips out, that blood is not machshir. So similarly, the milk that drips out that you don't want is not machshir. Okay? So they're comparing the milk of the animal to the wound of the animal. Okay? Rabbi Akiva was trying to compare the milk of the animal to the milk of the woman. So now Rabbi Akiva says, Amar lahen machmir ani b'chalav mibadam. I say that milk is more stringent than blood. Because if you milk a cow and you don't want the milk, but let's say the cow is engorged, so you're trying to alleviate its pain, it's for health reasons, that's also considered desiring it. But if you draw blood from an animal, okay, even though you could say you don't really want it to lose blood, you're just trying to heal the animal, still that blood, so because you didn't want the blood, you just wanted to heal the animal, the blood is tahor. It doesn't make other things subject to tum'ah if it falls on them. So you see that blood and milk operate in two different dimensions. You're comparing the blood of the woman to the milk of the woman, and the blood of the animal to the milk of the animal. But look, the reality is that even within animal, the rule of an animal's blood and an animal's milk is not the same. Because an animal's blood, if it's removed for health reasons, is still tahor. It's still considered that you didn't want it. Whereas milk that's removed for health reasons is considered that you did want it. So you can't really compare milk to blood then. So now the Chachamim say back, Amrullah, they said to him, Saleh zetim v'anavim yochichum. We can prove it from baskets carrying olives and grapes. She'amashkina yotz'in mehen l'ratzon tme'in shel l'ratzon teorim. Because if the juice drips from those baskets, and you didn't want the juice to drip from those baskets because you're losing juice, in other words, you put your fruit into a basket that has holes in it, obviously. It's like a wicker basket. So the juice will come out. So we say that only if you wanted the juice to come out, is it considered to be a valuable beverage, and therefore if it drips on something, it can make that thing, let's say you put the basket with the fruit that you just collected, and some of the grape juice drips on some of your food. Is that going to make it mekabel tum'ah? So if you wanted it to drip out, yes. If you didn't want it to drip out, no. So you see from that we make that there's a big distinction between things that come out that you want them to come out and that you don't want them to come out.
So this is the basis of the halacha that you have to wash
if you have wet fruits, that has to be I mean, it's not the basis of it, but yeah, it's the same concept. Yeah. So Rashi says Eino domel shelo l'ratzon liyotze l'ratzon, that you see from the case of the fruits that you don't compare a case where something is desired when something isn't desired. Okay. Now, but what's the relevance of this whole back and forth between Rabbi Akiva and Chachamim to our case? So my love l'ratzon denichale. Shelo l'ratzon bistama. Now, throughout this discussion, don't we assume that whenever it says shelo l'ratzon, it means stam? In other words, it means he doesn't care. And l'ratzon means my love l'ratzon dinichale. In other words, when it says l'ratzon, it means he wants it. So when it said that the woman's milk comes out because she wants it, when it said l'ratzon, when it said that the juice drips out l'ratzon, it means you wanted it. And what does shelo l'ratzon mean? It means that you were indifferent. It means it dripped out and you didn't care. You didn't know, you didn't care. In other words, isn't it saying that you need a positive designation to define it as juice? Not stam. Rabbi Yehuda said that stam, if you bring the fruit in, we assume that it's for fruit juice. Not true. Because you see that stam is not enough, you have to want it. So the Gemara says, so uma zetim va'anavim debnei schitan inu shelo l'ratzon velo klum. Now, if we see that when you carry these fruits in a basket, if you're indifferent to the juice dripping, okay, it's stam, it just dripped out. That we see velo klum, that it's nothing, even though grapes and olives are made for juicing most of the time. They're made for squeezing out their juice. In other words, that's why they're gathered, to make grape juice or to make olive oil. So tutim v'rimonim, so with berries and pomegranates, where it's not as clear that they're for juice, it's limbo. So certainly then, if it's stam, meaning if you're indifferent, if you haven't decided that it's for juice, we shouldn't assume it's for juice. So we have to change our premise, right? L'ratzon bistama. When it says l'ratzon, that's stam. When it says shelo l'ratzon, degalei adate damar lo nichali. When it says shelo l'ratzon, that's when you said I didn't want it. In other words, now the Gemara is revising its assumption. So when it said about the woman's milk that it came out l'ratzon, she desired it, it just means she was indifferent. When it said shelo l'ratzon, it means she didn't want it to drip out. She specifically did not want it to. Not a lack of wanting, a not wanting. Okay? See the difference? Because not wanting can either mean I don't want that or I don't want that. It either means I lack a desire or I have a desire not to have it. Okay? So now it's saying when it said shelo l'ratzon, it meant a desire not to have it. Okay? And so lo l'ratzon, so l'ratzon means stam. when it says it was desired, it means no opinion was stated. When it says shelo l'ratzon, it means you didn't want it. So now we can revise everything and say, okay, so when you bring these tutim, you bring these berries in, and you bring these pomegranates in, the fact that you don't know is as good as affirming that they're going to be used for juice. Okay? Alternatively, maybe we can't draw a comparison between the baskets of olives and pomegranates because since there were holes in the basket, you know that the juice is going to drip, so you're demonstrating that you don't really want it. Because you have holes. If you wanted to keep it, you would have put something on the bottom. So obviously you didn't want it. Whereas, so still, again, the point is that over there, you would have to positively designate that you wanted the juice because otherwise you're putting it in a basket with holes. So obviously you don't want it. But here, maybe stam, without designating it either way, we're going to assume pomegranates and berries could be for juice. So we haven't disproven the idea of Rabbi Yehuda that stam could be as good as affirming in this case. Now, Ashkechan Rabbi Yehuda demodi l'Rabbanan bezeitim uva'anavim Rabbanan demodi l'Rabbi Yehuda b'shar perot milalan. So we've shown a case where we saw a Braita before that said that Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim both agree that when it comes to olives and it comes to grapes, juice that oozes from them on Shabbat, you're not allowed to use because it might entice you to squeeze them more. And we know that that's an Isur Deoraita to squeeze out grapes and olives for their juice and oil respectively. And grapes and olives, the stam use for them, the assumed use is for juicing. But where do we see that in other vegetables and fruits that the Chachamim agree with Rabbi Yehuda that you have to have designated them for juice, for the juice to be a significant beverage? Where do we see that? Ditanya, because we learned in a Braita that sochatin b'pig'in u'b'parishin u'b'uzardin avalo b'rimonim, that we said that you can squeeze plums and you can squeeze, I think, quinces, and you can squeeze these sort of like apples, like, what do you call them? Crab apples, basically. Aval lo bar rimonim, but you can't squeeze pomegranates on Shabbat. V'shel beit Menashia bar Menachem, and in the house of Menashia bar Menachem, hayu sochatin bar rimonim. They used to squeeze rimonim. Now what's the reason for that? Not on Shabbat. What it means is that they used to squeeze it so you see that it's a beverage. You see that was a common use. To make pomegranate juice was common. So all these other fruits, it's not common to use them for juice. So squeezing them is not significant. But in the case of, in the case of rimonim, pomegranates, we know that it's a common use because you see that the house of Menashia bar Menachem, they used to squeeze it for juice. So what do you see from here? So you see v'tev. So again, this shows you that the other fruits, since the stam designation is for food, not for drink, so therefore it's saying you can squeeze them out. And certainly if they ooze juice, you can take it, if you can even squeeze it. So the Gemara says, how do you know that this is the rabbis agreeing with Rabbi Yehuda? Remember, Rabbi Yehuda was the one that said that the only time oozing juice is a problem is when you designated the fruit for mashkin, for juice. And they're saying that the rabbis agree with that. With other fruits besides olives and grapes. So Dilma Rabbi Yehuda, maybe this Braita is Rabbi Yehuda too, and that's why it says that you can squeeze out these other fruits because they're for food, they're not for juice. Even if it's Rabbi Yehuda, because so far all that we've seen about Rabbi Yehuda is that he says that if juice oozes out of fruits, you can use it on Shabbat. He never said you could squeeze fruits. Therefore, what the Gemara says is like this, that this is actually a different case. This is going even further. Rabbi Yehuda has never said anything about the squeezing out of fruits. That wasn't the machloket between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim were only arguing about a case where the juice oozed out, whether you could use it or not. Here it's talking about actually squeezing it on purpose. We never had that before. So what do we see from here? We see that if a fruit is not really used for juicing in general, then squeezing it is not considered producing juice. It's just a way to soften the fruit or sweeten the fruit by crushing it a little bit. Okay? That is a different story, according to the Gemara now. And so Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim both apparently will allow you to do that. Not with rimonim, not with pomegranates, but with other fruits. They both will allow you to do it. Okay, since we don't see that Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim differ on this, so this must be something they all agree on. So the Gemara says, Shelbit Menashe bar Menachem hayu sochatin barimonim. What's the relevance of the fact that the house of Menashe bar Menachem used to squeeze pomegranates for juice? Rav Nachman halacha kishel bet Menashe bar Menachem. Rav Nachman said the halacha follows the house of Bet Menashe bar Menachem. Amar le Rava said to Rav Nachman, Menashe ben Menachem tanahu. Menashe ben Menachem is not a Tanah. He's not a rabbi. He's just somebody who used to squeeze juice. Why are you saying the halacha follows him? Right? V'chite halacha ki hay Tanah de savarla. And are you going to tell me that no, the halacha follows the rabbi that subscribed to the view of Menashe ben Menachem? In other words, that said that pomegranates are a squeezable fruit, are a commonly squeezed fruit. Really? Just because of that, we're going to follow him? Menashe ben Menachem have a ruba d'alma. Is the fact that one household squeezed pomegranates for juice make it the majority of the world? Obviously not. Yes, it is. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Hamekayim kotzim bakerem Rabbi Eliezer Omer Kadash v'chachamim rim eno mekadesh ela davar shekamo mekaymin. We know that there's a prohibition of kilayim bakerem. You can't plant other plants in a vineyard. What if you planted thorns in a vineyard? Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer says, you know what? Those thorns will now make the vines in the vineyard asurim b'hana'ah because they're mixed seeds. They're going to be prohibited in benefit. And according to the Chachamim, no. Only something that's planted normally can ruin a vineyard, not something that's not normally planted. So you decide to plant thorns because you're crazy, but nobody else does that. So wait a second. So what's the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer then? Because there are people in Arabia who would plant thorns in order to feed their camels. So it was done in certain sectors, basically. So since there's any culture in which it's done, that means that it's recognized as a valid activity. And therefore, planting thorns could be something that would ruin your vineyard.
Yeah, raspberries also have thorns.
Yeah, but they mean just like planting, just like brambles, that doesn't even produce fruit. But still, midi area, the Arabia atrahacha batladato etzel kol adam. Still, you can't compare Arabia to this one guy's household where they squeezed pomegranates. If nobody else in the world squeezes pomegranates, why would we go by this one guy? Rather, the reasoning is like Rav Chisda, Rav Chisda, tiradin shesachatan untanan b'mikveh poslin et hamikveh b'shinui mareh v'alav b'nei sachitan inhu. So beets that were squeezed and you got beet juice, borscht. Okay, you have borscht. So what happens? And they fall into the mikveh and turn the mikveh purple. They'll ruin the mikveh because they turn to purple. And yet, they're not b'nei sachitan. Nobody squeezes beets for juice normally. It's not a normal juice. The point is that since somebody squeezed it out, the reality is that he made it a significant beverage. Okay? Since he squeezed it out, he made it a significant beverage. So too, in the case of the people of the house of Menashe bar Menachem, since they squeeze out pomegranates and make juice, they make it a significant beverage. The fact is that it depends on you. Now Rashi, there's a long Rashi here. So he says, Afal gav de la alma lo chashiv. Even though in general people do not consider it significant, for those who consider it a beverage, it's going to be a beverage. And this is how Rav Nachman explains the Braita above, that the squeezing that's permitted is only for to sweeten the fruits, not to take out juice, except for a situation, a context in which he says, "Aval lo barimonim, ba'afilu lemitaken the shalbit menashe hayu sochatin b'chol letzorich mashke." Since there were people who squeezed pomegranates for juice, hilkach b'shabbat asur afilu lematek. Therefore, you can't squeeze a pomegranate even to soften it or sweeten it. Ho'il ve'ikach had de'avid l'shem mashke. Since there's even one person who does it for the sake of making a beverage. It's not that he defines what a beverage is. It's that since there are people who do it for squeezing, it's a gezerah that maybe you will come to squeeze it out for a beverage. Since there are some people who do it for that reason. In other words, you might not. But the fact that there are some people who do means you might want to. As you might want to, that means we can't let you do it even to sweeten the fruit, because maybe you're going to say, hey, but my neighbor squeezed out the juice. I wonder what that's like. I'm going to try it. Right? So that since there are people who do it, therefore we're concerned. We don't allow you to do it. Not because he redefines what a beverage is because of this one person, but because of a gezerah. Because of a gezerah that if one person defines it as a beverage, you might also want to define it as a beverage and squeeze it out. Rav Papa says, "Mishum tahavei davar she'enu osin mimenu mikveh lachat techila. B'chol davar she'enu osin mimenu mikveh lachat techila, posel et hamikveh b'shinui mareh." You're wrong. That's not why beet juice makes a mikveh pasul. It's not because Rashi says, "Tamad etradin la mishum chashivutad achshevinuhu ulolam la mashkeninhu." Really, beet juice is not considered a juice at all. And the fact that one person in the world defines it as a juice isn't going to make it a juice. Why does it ruin a mikveh? It ruins a mikveh because it's not something from which a mikveh can be made. And any liquid from which a mikveh cannot be made is going to ruin the mikveh if it changes the mikveh's appearance. Okay? That's the problem. So we're not talking here about defining a beverage that, if somebody in the world defines it as a beverage, now we have to make a gezerah that maybe you're going to define it as a beverage and therefore you're going to squeeze the fruit and try to extract it. It doesn't work like that. The only thing is that over here in the case of mikveh, we say that that anything that a mikveh can't be made of will ruin the mikveh. That's all. So it's not hatam. We learned in the Mishnah over there, nafal letocho yain or chometz umochal, that if wine or chometz or mochal, vinegar or mochal, we'll see what that is in a second, fell into a mikveh v'shina marav pasul, and it changed the appearance of the mikveh, it ruins it. So man tanad de mochal mashkehu. Mochal is the sweat of olives, basically. When they would put the olives in a vat to squeeze them, they would sweat at 3 stages. First, they would sweat when you first put them in, when they were together. Then, over time, as the pressure built, they would sweat more. And after you crushed them, they would exude like after sweat, after they were crushed and the oil was exuded. So, umatam amru mochal. So, who is the one who says that mochal is a liquid? So, Amar Abai says, Rabbi Yaakov, it's Rabbi Yaakov. The Tanya, as we said in the Braita, Rabbi Yaakov Omer, mochal harehu kamashkeh. We treat the sweat of olives like a drink. It's a beverage. Why is it then that the first mochal, when you first put the olives into the vat and they sweat the liquid, the pre-liquid, why do we consider that tahor? He says it's not because the sweat of olives is not considered to be a liquid. It's because you don't want that initial sweat. You would rather that it kept all of its moisture so that when you squeeze it out, you get even more benefit. Okay, Rabbi Shimon Omer mochal eno kamashke. Rabbi Shimon says you're wrong. Mochal is not considered a beverage at all. So then why is the after liquid that sweats after you've squeezed the olives and they exude even more sweat afterwards? Why is that tameh then? Why is that subject to the laws of Tumah if we're saying it's not a beverage? Answer, because it never is without some actual oil inside. Because you already squeezed them out, the olives. So there's some residue of oil there. And then when they sweat, it mixes with the oil. You see? So what's the point here? The point is that they both agree that the initial sweat is not a beverage. They both agree that the sweat at the end is a beverage. The question is, what is it generally? Is it that it's generally a beverage? But the case where it's not treated as a beverage is an exception because you didn't want it, the pre-liquid. Or is it that it really isn't a beverage? Why do we treat it at the end like a beverage? Because it's mixed with an actual beverage, which is the oil. So, my benayu, what's the machloket between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yaakov? Ika benayu da'ate batar itzatzta. The sweat that comes after the first squeezing of the olives together. Okay, after the pressure of the olives, the middle exuding, what do we treat that as? Everyone agrees the initial emission of sweat is nothing. Everybody agrees at the end it's something. What about in the middle? That's the machloket. So Rava Amar Rava says that Rava says mishum dehavei davar she'eno sin hemenu mikveh uposel et mikveh b'shinui mareh, that because it's something that you can't make a mikveh from. In other words, we said before, we quoted this braita that said that vinegar, wine, or mochal that falls into a mikveh will make it pasul. So then they said, obvious it's being treated like a beverage. Who is the Tana that says it's a beverage? Rabbi Yaakov says it's considered one of the beverages. Okay? But now Rava is saying, no, you don't have to say that. Because we have a deeper principle than that, which is that anything that is not allowed to be the substance of a mikveh. In other words, anything that you can't make a mikveh out of it has the potential to invalidate a mikveh if it changes the appearance of the mikveh. So this is a principle that we can't assume that every liquid that invalidates a mikveh is recognized halachically as a beverage. What's defined as a beverage is a much more complicated thing. And that's why there's a whole discussion here about the rimonim and the tutim. The Shulchan Aruch basically says that since there are people who squeeze it out, for basically the Rambam has and the Shulchan Aruch has that olives and grapes are an isur mideoraita to squeeze them out. Rimonim and tutim, the pomegranates and the berries, since they are frequently used for squeezing out, so therefore if something oozes, it's rabbinically prohibited to squeeze them. And if something oozes out from them, we can't use it either because we're concerned that you might squeeze it out more. But any other fruits, the Shulchan Aruch actually allows you to squeeze out lemon, for example, and things like that, and oranges and stuff like that, because even if you squeeze out lemon's easier to understand because nobody squeezes lemon juice actually to drink. Even if you use it usually in food or in something else. You don't usually drink lemon juice by itself. But oranges today, I'm wondering, nowadays people squeeze oranges all the time. So I'm wondering if oranges are probably in the same category as rimonim and tutim. Not the same as maybe olives and grapes, because that's where the Torah defines, the primary.
You don't squeeze oranges to put it on food.
No, you drink it, right? That's what I'm saying. You make a beverage. So I would think that the rimonim and the tutim category, which is things that many people squeeze just to drink the liquid, it probably would include nowadays oranges as well, because oranges sort of have the same status in our culture, where most people buy them to eat, but many people buy them to squeeze for freshly squeezed juice and drink it. So it might not be that that's the primary essence. In other words, that's not the essence of the fruit. Like when we look at olives and we look at grapes, the Torah defines the essence of a grape as making juice. That's why I say borei priya gefen when you drink wine or grape juice. And the Gemara even discusses in Masekhet Brachot, why don't we have a separate blessing on olive oil? Because and it has to give a reason for that, because it's really the essence of the fruit. So, but in all other ones, it's not the essence of the fruit, but it's commonly done. So therefore, it's still prohibited, and therefore the mashkeh that oozes out of it is going to be a concern as well. That's the way that the Shulchan Aruch rules, in accordance basically with the Chachamim here, not Rabbi Yehuda. That even if you brought it in as a food, in other words, since it's commonly used for squeezing, we're going to have to prohibit it. Now we're going to stop here, because if we start, we go into a whole new discussion that carries us all the way halfway through the next Amud. So Be'ezrat Hashem, on Purim Shushan tomorrow, we will continue.